Welcome and thank you for listening to the Sales Maven Show. I'm your host, Nikki Roush, and I'm excited to celebrate with you today that this is episode 300 of the podcast. That seems crazy, but here we are. It doesn't seem like I recorded 300 podcasts, and maybe you've even listened to most of those podcasts. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to take a little bit of time today in this particular episode to share just kind of some reflections. And I'm also celebrating 12 years in business this month as I record this. So it just feels like some big milestones. So I want to just really talk about what this has meant, but I'm going to tie it into a story. So if you've listened to me for a while, you might know that I do have a background in storytelling. I studied it. I got to study with a master storyteller, and we worked a lot with parables and fairy tales and things like that to really hone your storytelling skills. Um, and there was one story in particular, and it's really been on my heart and my mind lately. So I want to bring it here. I'm not sure that I've ever shared it. Definitely, I don't think I've ever shared it on the podcast. I think I might have shared it one time in a training, but it's probably one of my favorite stories that I've ever learned. But I think about how it relates to kind of where we are, but also in the work that I do. So the story, if you've never heard this story before, this is a West African tale, and it's about a hunter, and it's actually called "The Hunter and the Blind Man," I believe. That's the and so if you've heard this story before, and as I tell it, one of the things that can happen is if you've heard a story or read a story before and the new teller tells it in a different way, please give me some grace is what I would ask for here, because I will tell it the way I learned it. And it may be different than the way that you learned it. And that's hopefully okay. I'm asking permission, I guess, from you to give me some grace to allow me to tell it the way that I learned it. And I apologize if that ruins anything for you. But if you've never heard it before, this is my favorite, really my favorite story. And I think about it a lot. So, The Hunter and the Blind Man. Years ago, obviously, in a small village in West Africa, there was a great hunter. And he was a great hunter because when he would go out, he would come back and bring things back that would feed the tribe. Now, the hunter fell in love with this very beautiful young woman that was a part of the village. And this young woman had a brother, and the brother was the blind man. That's what he was known as in the village. And he was a wise man. He was the person that the villagers, when they were struggling with something and didn't feel well or just needed advice, they would go to the blind man. And it was often quoted that he would see with his ears because obviously he couldn't see with his eyes. So he would see things or understand things that gave him this wisdom that the villagers found a lot of value in, except for the hunter who built his whole world and his whole identity around being this strong provider for the village didn't really see much value in the blind man because he couldn't hunt. Like, what could he provide? He wasn't providing sustenance to to the people in the village. So, yeah, the hunter didn't really think much of the blind man. And the blind man really wanted to get to know the hunter because the hunter was an important person to his sister, and he loved his sister very much. So he asked the hunter if he could go out hunting one day with him. To which the hunter scoffed, "Of course, no, you can't go out hunting with me." But he kept asking, and you know, the hunter, he loved that woman, and he was willing to maybe do some things he didn't want to keep her happy, and she wanted him to have a relationship with her brother. And so eventually he acquiesced and he agreed to take the blind man on one of his hunting trips. And that particular day they were going out and they were going to set traps for birds. So he gathered all his gear and he goes to get the blind man, and the blind man asks, can I just hold on to your elbow and as you walk me to where we're going, and that will help me find my way. And so, of course, the hunter is a little like, oh, geez, well, this is going to slow me down, but okay. So he lets him hold on to his elbow. And as they're walking, at one point, the blind man squeezes the hunter's elbow and he says, shh, up ahead, there's a lion. And we need to wait here. And the hunter's looking around going like, what do you mean a lion? How would he know? And then the blind man squeezes the elbow again and says, "Oh, he's eaten. He's napping now. It's okay. We can keep going." So the hunter starts going again, and then he does see evidence that there's a lion, and he sees kind of a glimpse of him through the bush that, yeah, he is in fact sleeping. And so they quietly make their way past, and they're walking and they're walking, and then the blind man squeezes the hunter's elbow again, and he says, "Oh, up ahead there's a huge elephant. We might need to wait here so as to not, you know, get trampled." And the hunter's a little bit like, well, he did know about the lion, so I don't know. We'll see. So he waits a little bit, and then the blind man says, "Oh, it's okay. He's bathing himself in the river, so we can keep going." And so they walk again, and sure enough, there's evidence. There's the elephant in the water. They walk by, and they finally get to the place where they set their traps. And they set the traps, and then they leave them and go, and wait for there to be time for them to catch the birds, and have lunch. And while they're sitting there, the hunter's thinking about, okay, I did this just to make my love happy, and okay, so let's go back and we'll check the traps and see what's there. So he gathers the blind man up, and they walk back to the traps. And as he gets closer, the hunter notices that in the blind man's trap, there's this big bird with this huge breast and these colorful feathers. And this is a bird that will feed quite a few people. And then he looks in his trap, and there's this tiny little gray bird. Hardly anything. Not much meat on that bird. So the hunter's thinking, well, I can't go back to the village and show that the blind man has this big, beautiful, plump bird, and I've got this tiny little nothing bird. So I'll just tell the blind man to wait here as I get the birds out of the trap, and I'll switch them, and no one will know. So he does. He switches them, and he goes back, and he gives the blind man the little gray kind of nothing bird, and he says, "Here's what you caught." So the blind man takes it and says, "Okay." And so then the hunter puts his elbow out and says, "Okay, here's my elbow. Let's head back to the village." And the blind man says, "Oh, no, no, no. I've got it. I know my way now. Thank you." And as they're walking back, the hunter's thinking about, feeling a little embarrassed about the birds, but also wondering, what is it that the villagers see in this blind man, and why do they take this time to ask him things? And so he thinks, I'll ask him a challenging question. And so he says, "Hey, blind man, answer me this. Why are there so many bad things that happen in this world that can't be explained? Why is that? What do you have to say?" And without missing a beat, the blind man says, "Well, a lot of bad things that happen in this world is because people take advantage of those that they perceive as less than. And they take things that don't belong to them. That's why bad things happen." And they're walking along, and oh boy, now the hunter's starting to feel a little ashamed and a little wondering about his actions and what he did. And could he really go back to the village and pretend that he caught something he didn't? catch. So he decides to say, hey, blind man, I made a mistake. I gave you the wrong bird. This is actually the bird that was in your trap. And he trades him, and the blind man takes the bird, doesn't say anything, and they keep walking again. And so then the hunter says, well, blind man, let me ask you this. Why do good things happen that can't be explained? And the blind man says, well, a lot of good things happen because people can learn from their mistakes. People can do better, and they can help others that can't do for themselves. Well, now the hunter's thinking, oh, wow, okay, well, maybe he does know a thing or two, and he's starting to feel a little bit better about himself. And they go back to the village, and they end up becoming quite good friends. And the blind man is often introduced to new people that come into the village by the hunter. He puts his arm around the blind man and he says, this is a wise man, because he sees with his ears and he feels with his heart. And he's very proud of that. Okay, so that's the story of the hunter and the blind man. And this is why this story really is on my heart when I think about the work that I do, the people that I get to interact with. It is something about what real confidence, I think, looks like. One of the things that most people, when they come to me, one of the things that they want is they want to feel more confident in what it is that they're doing. And they're experts. They are absolute experts at whatever their topic is, whatever their business is. Sales isn't something that they are experts at. And when they show up, they're willing to acknowledge that they're there to, like, they're here to learn. You're here, hopefully, to learn. That's maybe why you're listening to this podcast. And there is something about the confidence of being willing to stand in your place of authority and credibility about the things that you know, and then being willing to ask questions and be willing to be vulnerable to show that there are things that can be learned. I find such power in that. I find inspiration in it. Oof, it brings some emotion up for me that people are willing to be curious and let go of having to always be seen as having all the answers, and willing to show that there's something they're there to learn, that there's something that they're willing to improve themselves about. I just think that is so beautiful and powerful. And it makes me feel really honored to get to do the work that I do. And I will say, early in my career, I really thought that it was about, having all the answers and, wanting to prove myself. Especially, I remember, I worked in a very male dominated industry. And at one point and I know I've talked about this before, when I switched companies that I was working for, I went and I sold technology. So I went from selling, you know, this technology in the video side of AV, so audio visual. So I sold the video side of it. And then when I went to work for this company that sold the audio side, I didn't know anything about audio. Frankly, I still don't really know much about audio. Um, and I was so intimidated because I was showing up to present and basically sell my product to these audio engineers. I used to always say, like, they could pick up things, they could hear things that I never thought dogs could even hear. Dogs are known for their hearing. And they could pick up just like things in the audio. It was so unbelievable to me that their hearing was so in tune. And I remember just thinking, like, how am I ever going to be able to, like, be on that same level? And then when I realized I'll never be on their level, like, that's not my expertise. And there was some confidence found when I realized I just needed to be able to do a certain aspect. I needed to be able to talk about my product from a place of credibility. I needed to understand my product. And I needed to understand how it could benefit the person that I was talking to and selling to, but that I didn't need to try to compete and be on that same level. And there was such a freedom in that, of realizing like I didn't need to be intimidated by the audio engineers, and I didn't need to pretend. And also, I could admit freely that I wasn't an audio engineer. I couldn't hear the things that they could pick up and hear in the frequencies and things like that. Like I was okay, and it was okay for me to be able to admit that. And it did bring a new level of confidence. And when I see that with my clients, that they can show up and they can interact with their clients without this idea of like having to be the know-it-all. And when they find that sales isn't about being the know-it-all, it's not about having all of the answers, it's about willing to lean in to the relationship. Like there just feels like so much power that comes from that. And when you learn that you don't have to try to impress people to earn their business. What you need to do instead is to understand them. What's going on for them? What's their need? What are they looking to solve? That there is just like there's so much power in this. And again, I think about this story of the hunter and the blind man, and this arrogance that this hunter kind of showed up with. But yet when he was willing to kind of take a step back and look for the value in the other person, like what made this blind man so attractive to the villagers, and this knowledge that he had, and really ask questions, then they're allowed, like it allowed for this relationship to unfold. And that just feels incredibly powerful for the work that I'm doing and how it relates. So anyway, I feel like I'm being indulgent with this episode. So thank you for indulging me and letting me share one of my all-time favorite stories of the hunter and the blind man, and this idea of learning and how it relates, I think, to the 300 episodes, and how honored I am, truly honored and blessed that I feel that I get to work with the people that I get to work with, and that people show up and want to ask me questions. Um, I will say many, many times in my life, I have shown up as the hunter, uh, with an arrogance that I feel like, whew, life has a way of just smacking me down, and putting me in my place. And thank you for it. My higher power, I'm gonna say, like, the lessons there have been very powerful. And there are times where I have had the great honor of sometimes being seen as the one that people would come to and ask questions of. And that feels, I don't take that for granted. That feels special. Um, I often feel like it's a gift that I get to be a conduit, for a higher power and a higher sense of purpose. Um, I often say, like, sometimes I feel like they're not my answers. They're like an answer, and I'm just the one who gets to deliver it when people ask me questions. I really truly do feel honored that people show up and want to listen and are curious. Um, and I also want to say here that one of the things that I feel is important to talk about lately, and I've been trying to bring this into the society in our group coaching calls, and even just when I've been teaching lately, that the thing about the structure and the reason that I teach the selling staircase, the framework of a successful sales conversation, is that it's really permission, that it isn't about saying everything perfectly and being perfect. It gives you structure so that you can say it in your way and just understand kind of what the structure is, so you know how to like guide gracefully the person to the next step. That it isn't about being perfect. We did a practice session where I've been doing practice sessions in the society, and we just had one recently, and we were talking about overcoming objections. And I was teaching around, how do you structure the conditional close question? And I hope that the group that showed up, what they took away from it is that, yes, there is structure to a conditional close question that you can ask when somebody voices an objection. And it isn't about saying it perfectly, and you'll manipulate, frankly, the conditional close question to fit the application, the situation, the conversation, the words that have been used, the objection that's coming up. And also that overcoming an objection doesn't always mean closing the sale. Sometimes overcoming the objection just means furthering the conversation. And the goal that I was attempting to give to the people that were there is that it isn't about being perfect. It isn't about saying it perfect. It is just about saying it. And it is about testing the waters and not holding yourself to this standard that you need to have all the answers. Because the other thing that happens when you ask a conditional close question and somebody then agrees to hear kind of a little bit more about what it is that you have to share, then oftentimes the solution that you might propose, they'll come back with a much better solution. The prospect, the potential client will come back with a much better solution than what you could ever come up with on your own. And there is such power in that, because that will have more influence than anything you could say, anything I could say, perfectly, which, perfect isn't something I strive for. So it's not about saying it perfectly. It's just understanding the structure. It's understanding when to pull it into the conversation and to just get the words out of your mouth, that it isn't about ego. That's the other thing too, that sales, thinking like, I've met some salespeople and you think, oh, they have such big egos. So I don't want to be a salesperson because I don't want to be somebody who walks around with a big ego, right? Like, I don't know if you would agree with that, but sometimes that's some feedback that I've gotten. And boy, have I been around some salespeople that have some really big egos. But ego, like, the more you can let your ego kind of step to the side, and again, I am just as guilty as anybody else. My ego can sometimes get in the way. I try really hard not to let the ego get in the way of my relationships with clients. I also try really hard not to let my ego get in the way of money in my business. So I often have to ask myself, like, is this my ego that is wanting things to be perfect or wanting somebody to do it my way? Or is this really going to make a difference in their success? Because if it's my ego of wanting it to be my way, that is irrelevant. Really, it has to be set aside. Um, that it isn't about ego. It's not about somebody doing it your way. Everybody can find their own way, which is why I often say, like, I don't teach people how to sell like me. I teach people how to be more successful with their own personalities, their own genuine kind of approach to things by adding some structure, right? And then it allows you to be you, and then you attract your ideal clients. So that feels like the work that I'm really meant to do here. And I hope that from you listening to however many episodes you've listened to, gosh, this is the only one you've listened to, please go back and at least listen to one more where I'm actually teaching a concept that you can immediately implement into your business. I just want to say, as I close this episode, my gratitude that I feel for you as a listener, my gratitude for the work that I get to do, the clients that I get to work with, and this journey of podcasting, 300 episodes. I'm so grateful that people show up and still listen to the podcast. And every once in a while, someone will say, like, I've heard every episode. And I think, dang, thank you. Because either we've been together for years, or I know somebody not too long ago told me they binged every episode on a very long drive that they were on. And I thought, oh my goodness, wow, thank you. I do want to share just a few little recaps of the podcast of some pivotal moments that, if I could, in case, and I'd love to hear yours. Like, I'd love to know what has been your favorite episode or episodes, and if you're willing to share, I promise I'll be so happy to hear and delighted. So please do share. I will say one of the episodes I was very proud of, I'll share this here, that is one of the least listened to episodes, which it can often be the case, I have found. Sometimes I'll record an episode and I'll think, oh, that was a good one. I'm really excited for people to hear it. And then it doesn't get very many listens, and or it doesn't, I don't get any responses. And then others where I think like, oh, I don't know. We'll see how that one lands. People are like, I love that episode. So I never know. I can never predict. But I will say I was particularly proud of episode 3. I know that's way back. I'm calling way back. Episode 3, it was making a positive first impression. It was part 2. Part 1 gets plenty of listens over it's not that people haven't listened to it. They certainly have. But the number of that, like the downloads of that particular episode 3, is such a like low number. And yet, gosh, I was so proud of that particular content. And I remember it's been years since I've listened to it, but I remember I was being like, how come people don't like that episode? I don't know. Or why don't they listen to it? Sometimes I think, was it because I didn't do a good enough job in episode 2 and they thought they could just skip episode 3? I don't know, but I just want to share that was something it's always like been on my mind. I'll tell you one of my other favorite early on episodes was episode 30. And this one was with Julie Fry, and it was consultation calls and doing them successfully. And I'll tell you the reason I love this episode so much is because she actually was a repeat guest. This was a sales success story, and she was coming back and talking about the success that she was having with her consultation calls. And if you jump back, there's an earlier episode where we're doing an on-air coaching call about some struggles that she was having with her consultation calls. So I love progress. I love people who implement. I mean, frankly, I love Julie Fry. If you haven't heard me say her name 1,000 times, I don't know why we haven't spent much time together because I adore her. She's my podcast pitcher. I always want to give a credit, your expert guest, and she's brilliant. And, being willing to come on the podcast and be vulnerable and do an on-air coaching call, and then being willing to come back and do a success story. So I particularly love that episode. One of my most listened to episodes, which is not surprising at all, which was episode 106. And it's with the brilliant Natalie Ekdahl, how specializing and niching your business makes you referable. Well, first of all, Natalie is just an incredible, brilliant mind. She is a friend. She's now become a friend. She's been a mentor to me for many, many years. And man, when she talks, she really speaks from a place of authority and credibility. She knows what she's talking about. She's so good at what she does. And I love that people show up and want to hear her episode. Behind the scenes, that episode was super fun because she really got a sense of her structure of going through that process and sharing it in that particular episode. And she's gone on to do brilliant, amazing things. I mean, she's brilliant, amazing on her own, but using what she took away from that episode, that felt really special. That's why one of the reasons I love the Mastering Excellence series is because sometimes the guest learns things about themselves that they didn't know at a conscious level before. And so I think for her, that was one of them. She often talks about it with me. And so I feel really proud. Plus, again, she's brilliant on it. So if you haven't listened to it, please do. And then I'm going to say one of the episodes that I think about the most is episode 222. Boost sales with Google Business Profile, essential strategies for maximizing visibility and engagement. And this was with the brilliant Melissa Rose. She said things on that episode that have completely changed my mind, completely changed how I do things. I have implemented her strategy of asking for Google reviews from my clients. And now I have, I think, somewhere like 35 or 39 Google reviews, which before that episode, I think I had one. So it was episode 222. So it was quite a few episodes ago, but not that long ago. And I have encouraged my clients as a result of what she shared on that episode to get their Google reviews up. I have booked a speaking gig from my Google reviews. I have gotten recommendations as a result of people like reading those reviews, people coming, like referrals, I guess I should say. And so that was just a really powerful episode. So that's all I'm going to share about the episodes. I just am so grateful to be here, that you're still listening. Hopefully you're still listening to the episode at this point. I just want to say I am really looking forward to the next 300 episodes. I have intention of continuing this podcast, and who knows with intentions, but I will say that my promise to you is to continue to try to keep every episode something that is simple, that you can easily implement, and also that I am learning alongside you and growing alongside you. And so I hope there has been evolution for you and for me too in these 300 episodes. And I also want to remind you, the one piece of advice that people often ask me, if you could only give somebody one piece of advice around sales. I say this on other people's podcasts all the time. So I want to just leave it here with you, that the one piece of advice that if I could only give you one thing about sales, is to issue invitations to people through asking questions to work with you. Oftentimes we forget to issue invitations, and it's the difference maker in business and specifically in sales. So I'll just leave that here for you. If you haven't invited anybody recently to work with you, it's probably time for you to issue an invitation. And if you've been talking to somebody and they haven't bought yet, ask yourself, have you issued an invitation? And if not, please do that and see what happens as a result. All right. Thank you for listening. I am wishing you continued success. Thank you for all the success that you've allowed for me to have with this podcast by showing up and listening. And as long as you continue to show up and listen, I will continue to put podcasts out. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.